and we're here today with the Modist to have a fun conversation amongst friends. How is a modern woman a modern woman? And I think a lot of people, kind of always ask like, well, how do you multitask so often? Or how do you manage your time? You're like, well, I do because I do,
I think we're in a very interesting time right now. I mean, I'm sure every generation felt that way, and that's probably the luck that we have as humans to feel that we're living, the never experienced before, or, the new struggles or the new things where actually, the more you read, the more you learn, history keeps on repeating itself. As a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as a professional, as someone who has tried to find their place professionally. And it's hard to work professionally when you have kids, when you are, in a relationship. It gets harder, I find.
Well, I mean, no wonder, it's so hard for, women to really understand in a context of a business, how do you keep your day job if you work in a traditional office environment? And I have to say, I'm extremely lucky that I don't have to, because I don't actually know how I would. I don't have kids.
But talking about how the world is changing, what we are noticing is the job descriptions, the job hours are not going to be the same anymore. The world is changing, And that's, I find, gives me a lot of hope in terms of the potential that humans will have, and women and men and gender, across gender.
Because I think that's actually, you are someone who lives, in a household full of men, except for Nina, your adorable little doggy. But, you have two sons and your husband. And, is that something that you think of even just as being the mother to sons? And this is something I've always been really fascinated by. How do you teach your sons to be modern men, with a deep respect for women, with an understanding of what's happening in the world, and, really bringing that as a part of the conversation, rather than so often people think, oh, they just need to talk to their daughters about that, or,
I think that it is through the example that we do it primarily, but I am confronting myself with the rise of this issue now, because my eldest is 5, and now the questions start to really be deeper and
more complex.
And suddenly, I swear, for the first time in my life, yes, I might have felt in moments in my life where I was looking for the right answer for people. But now I'm genuinely sitting there thinking, how do I present this in a way that is comprehensive enough, that is inclusive enough, that is accepting? But what is amazing is how open-minded kids are. That's the most amazing thing.
Well, if they have parents that illustrate it to them, probably.
But still, there is an impulse of youth that is open. Then life conditions it, but I can see it in my kids, that there is an openness to acceptance in the first place.
And especially, I mean, you and I share this kind of love, I think, for what we do see as progressive California, and especially LA, where I kind of partially grew up San Diego, this idea of diverse, inclusive communities that are also really not just trying to stay and be so proud of themselves and pat on the back, but really trying to push and move things forward and questioning.
But when you think
models.
of yourself as American, you think of yourself more from California or from Minnesota?
Well, I mean, whenever anybody asks me where I'm from, I'm half American, half Libyan. And then when they're like, oh, but from where? I'll say, well, I grew up partially in California, but my mother's from Minnesota. I mean, they're both very important parts of where I'm from.
No, because I see both aspects, but there is a big thread in you of California, sort of go get what you want, believe in yourself.
Well, in California, I mean, the West Coast is the best coast, after all. Well, and I mean, I think especially now what you see, happening in, in the U.S. and politics and in, Europe, you see that California is frankly one of the last bastions of believing in protecting people's civil rights and believing in the people that live there, and not believing in divisions. I mean, I also have to say that that's a very Minnesota quality too, and it's from the family that I'm from. I mean, my mom, grew up in a small town, brought home my father, a Libyan as Libyan gets, and nobody questioned it. It was like, okay, great.
They didn't question it.
It was like,
because
okay.
when my mother brought us Sednaoui, they were like, what is this Arab, you know?
Oh yeah, so mine, they didn't. I mean, maybe my mom was
No, but
always
your
the one that
mother-
they knew would be
Yeah.
the different one. It was never something that, became a problem. And so when my mother and I left Cairo to go back to the US, California always seemed...
So that's another connection, you see. You lived in Cairo.
Yes.
And one of your first projects you, as a professional was in Siwa.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's another good
My
thread.
first, and actually really related to what you are talking about in terms of Fantasia and the work you do at ESF, is this idea of like bringing creativity to communities that wouldn't necessarily have those outlets. So like people living in peripheries, people living in impoverished or let's say lower income neighborhoods all over the world. But for me, my first experience was going to Siwa, to an oasis on the border of Libya, having never been to Libya, seeing Libya across the great, sand sea, as they call it there, and, having this very ephemeral experience, and frankly, just totally cheesy, but just so true, of just feeling everything come together. And this aspect of, that the arts and that, creativity and culture can really change the world. Okay, so since we met 4 years ago, I'd say quite a few things have evolved. I wouldn't say anything has drastically changed in both of our lives, but I mean, the nature of our lives, I think, has changed, like the things we're focusing on, the various professional and personal kind of movements of, our, the various professional, personal movements of, our focus for, on the arts, on your professional life, on the foundation. I see you as a very empowered woman, but I see you as very much a woman in that. You work in a way that, of course, has to do with this idea of, kind of feminine qualities of care, education, and...
But you know what it is? I think it's very fun. I mean, when you're asking me this question, something came to me very clearly. And I just feel that most of my life, weirdly, because I've worked in an industry where I was evidently working with how I looked also, I have lived, in terms of feeling, a genderless life. I do not wake up in the morning thinking I am a woman and I have a battle as a woman. I was brought up by my parents feeling completely equal, man and woman. So for me, this idea of man and woman issue didn't present itself until much later. I think it happened when I had the baby, because then suddenly you are confronted with having to find your own new, renewed space as a woman. Who are you today? Because you thought you were going to be in a certain way. You thought you were going to meet and marry. And then it happens to you. And there is what society is telling you.
You ticked the boxes, and then what?
Suddenly you have what society has told you you should be, what your family thread has sort of shown women to be, or whatever you... And then what your husband or partner wants, expects, projects, thinks, what he has dealt with in terms of his upbringing, so issues that he may have with women in his life, his mother, his things, all rise up. And so you have to find your own space. And so for me, to answer your question, I look for that space every day. Every day in my life, I am confronted with situations and I think to myself, who am I within this situation? Which decision am I gonna take? And how am I gonna stand by it?
And I also grew up in a very traditional Libyan family in Cairo, and then back and forth to Minnesota, to also quite a traditional middle-class American family that had traditional roles, for my grandmother, etc. But at the same time, always understood that it was gonna be different in the next generation. Yeah. That my grandmother didn't go to university, but my mother and her sister would. Different contexts for each, this idea of progression, I think, is so important, and something we kind of forget right now, as we seem to be taking so many steps back in other parts of the world and other, kind of parts of, society and life. But then I do see really important conversations being had about, maternity leave, equal pay, things that are actually not a reality. maybe a reality, you know, in certain industries, but definitely not a reality in all. And I think even if you look at like film, if you look at, you know, actors and actress, you know, kind of the differentiation in pay. If you look at the art world, yes, it's incredible that we have a lot of amazing museum directors that are women, in London especially. I mean, London has really been incredible, you know, for that. You know, the director of the Tate Modern, now the director of Tate St. Ives, the Serpentine, you know, the CEO of the Serpentine, and you see these positions. But then if you look at the commercial art world, so, you know, as many people, you know, will kind of argue that money rules everything. If you look at the commercial art world, it's hugely dominated by men. But the conversations that are coming out of the rest of the world with the Me Too movement, with this new evolution of feminism, is that there are many more women that are being represented by galleries, many more women represented in museum shows, more women gallerists that are being really paid attention to, that are, you know, have been doing an incredible job for so long. And okay, yes, maybe it's, you know, for a very commercial reason that they need to discover new artists. So now there's a whole 50% of the world that they can say, oh, here's like an incredible woman artist. But you know what, that's okay. You know, I'll say then why not? Let it be for a kind of totally insincere reason. But if those women are then being brought to the fore, I mean, you saw that with the Obama portraits. You know, Michelle Obama's, you know, portrait of a strong black woman in, you know, a bastion of culture, of American culture, and that little girl staring at her. I mean, that was like an Instagram sensation. And it was like, there is me, Wonder Woman, you know, there is me. The whole, I think it's all, the idea of representation is incredibly important. And it only is happening because there are maybe too many conversations happening on the other side of things. But then hopefully that just makes it come more to the middle in a way. And I think that that idea of representation is, you know, as much as people will say, well, you know, like kind of the frivolity of appearances, it's actually not true, because the way you present yourself is really the first thing that people see. You know, if somebody doesn't know you, you know, what is it that they see in you? And so that idea of a portrait, that idea of a movie, that idea of what you wear, and even, you know, this idea of body language, and, you know, I think you are really that idea of the juxtaposition of it. You have like an incredible beauty, inner and outer, of course, but an incredible beauty that is very distinctly feminine, but at the same time also a touch of, you know,
I can look
masculine.
like a man in certain
and like your
situations.
body language, the way you dress is also that in between.
Yeah, I like,
You know, and
true.
so
I like
how
to
is
be
it
across
that,
those.
how do you kind of think about that idea of the way you present yourself in terms of fashion, but also just in terms of who you are to the world?
I think there again, freedom, preserving my own freedom is the first aspect of it. So I mean that I like to be able to go across different things, and I don't, you know, to not be expected. I mean, not that one would expect me in a style, but when you're working in fashion, you become very represented by what you wear, right? It becomes the other side of it. And so suddenly you're expected for a style, a defined style. And for me, I always, as you said, and you said it right, I mean, you know, you'll see me in suits, like men's suits primarily if I'm working, or you'll see me in jeans and t-shirt, because that's what my husband prefers. But then I'll have a moment where I really want to be feminine, and I want to have that...
A pretty dress.
Yeah, air them dress, or, you know, this sense of, you know, Diane von Furstenberg, superwoman type of thing. I mean, so yes, fashion is a tool. Fashion is a tool that we should use to empower ourselves. Again, my own taste, the genuine taste of what I like has, you know, developed more tightly over the last years. I used to be more vague about things, and now I know, okay, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And even if there's something that, oh, I like, I would be interested in buying it, but I'm not like really liking it, then I'm starting to not purchase anymore. I'm starting to resist it a little bit, because I think it's time to be more conscious buyers.
I don't know, for me, in terms of fashion, my number one thing was always only buying and wearing things that I felt looked good on me. So it was always, you know, this idea, and I think it's, obviously I, you know, got that from my mother, but it was, you know, that I would, whenever we went shopping, it would only ever be like, okay, so you like this piece, you try it on, does it fit you? It doesn't fit you, no matter how great it is, you don't buy that. Yeah. You know, does it suit your figure? If it doesn't suit your figure, doesn't matter if it's the trend. So I think, you know, for me, this idea of being like an empowered dresser was actually more about like feeling really good in myself, because, you know, we don't all have the ideal figure that we always want. You know, we go through moments, or we go through periods of not being as tan as we want to be, or being, you know, more tan, or being sunburned, or being, you know, whatever it is, you know, or having a zit, you know, like having that moment where you just feel like not quite your right self. And so for me, having my wardrobe be an element of just feeling really good about myself was really important.
Now for me, I really, and I've done it, it's funny that we talk about it now because I've been doing it in the last days. I just felt like it was a time of clearing out. And you know, there is this amazing woman, Japanese woman called Marie Kondo, who wrote this book, The Art of Tidying Up. And it's about only keeping what, when you hold it in your hand, sparkles joy. And also thanking something that has been with you or given you, you know, that you've shared a moment with, or shared, you know, extended moment with, you know, thanking it and letting it go. And letting it go, but recognizing that moment for what it was and letting it go. And so I do. I gave the other day to my best friend the shirt that I wore on the documentary shooting in Egypt when I was pregnant, hiding to be pregnant, that I was pregnant. And I kept it there for so many years. And you don't know how happy I was to see her looking so good in it and so happy to wear it. I was like, you see,
like
that's the whole point.
So giving something a second life, I suppose. Well, us, you know, through the iterations of our life, I guess maybe we sit down in another 5 years or so with the Modist and have a catch up as to, you know, what has further evolved.
I'm worried. I'm kind of worried, but kind of amused.